The guitar fell silent. Not stopped. Silent. As if the room itself had inhaled and forgotten to breathe. Olympic Studios, London. February 1968. 3 a.m. The kind of hour when truth lives in the spaces between words, when egos have nowhere left to hide, when the air itself feels heavy with something that can't be named but everyone can feel. 7 people in a small tracking room. Jimi Hendrix sat on a wooden stool in the corner, Stratocaster across his lap, adjusting the tuning pegs with fingers that moved like they were having a private conversation with the strings. His afro caught the single overhead light, creating a halo that seemed accidental but somehow perfect. He wore a simple purple shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. No performance. No audience. Just a man and his instrument in a room that smelled of cigarette smoke and old wood. Across from him, maybe 8 feet away but might as well have been 8 miles, sat Danny Mitchell. 24 years old. Studio session guitarist. 3 months in London, fresh from Birmingham, hungry to prove he belonged in rooms with people whose names appeared on album covers. He'd been good in Birmingham. The best, actually. People had told him so. Repeatedly. Danny held his Gibson Les Paul like it was a passport to somewhere he hadn't been invited yet. His fingers drummed against the body, not rhythmically, just the nervous energy of someone who needed to be doing something, anything, to fill the silence. The session had been booked for a string overdub on a Jimi Hendrix Experience track. Simple work. Danny wasn't supposed to be there. He was filling in for a friend who'd gotten sick. Show up, play some harmonies, collect a check, worked with Jimi Hendrix, to the resume. But then Jimi had started playing something between takes. Not a song. Just sounds. Notes that seemed to bend time. And Danny had made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He'd interrupted. "That's not even that difficult," Danny had said, his voice too loud in the quiet studio. "I could do that. Anyone could, really, with enough reverb." The room had frozen. Not dramatically. Just that subtle shift when everyone's attention pivots from what they were doing to what's happening now. The engineer's hand had stopped on the mixing board. The producer had looked up from his clipboard. Mitch Mitchell, Hendrix's drummer, had smiled slightly, the kind of smile that says this should be interesting. Jimi had simply stopped playing. His fingers had stilled on the fretboard. He'd looked at Danny with eyes that weren't angry or defensive. Just present. Completely, unnervingly present. "You think so?" Jimmy's voice was quiet. Not challenging. Genuinely curious. "Yeah, I do." Danny's voice carried the confidence of someone who didn't yet understand the difference between technical ability and something else. Something that didn't have a name. It's about speed and effects. I've been playing 12 years. I know what I'm doing. That night in a small studio, a man challenged Jimi Hendrix with 1 take, no mistakes, and Jimi quietly tuned his guitar, and the next 3 minutes changed that man's life forever. Jimi had nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's do something then." He gestured to the engineer. "Charlie, can you set up 2 mics? One for me, one for Danny here." Charlie had looked uncertain. "Jimi, we're already behind schedule. The string section is booked for." "I know," Jimi had said, still in that quiet voice. "This won't take long." He turned back to Danny. "Here's what we'll do. I'll play something. Just once. No effects, no reverb, no studio tricks. Just the guitar. Then you play it back. 1 take each. No mistakes." The room had gotten quieter. If that was even possible. Danny had felt the shift. Felt everyone's attention. This was his moment. The moment he'd been waiting for since he'd first picked up a guitar at 12 years old. Proof. Validation. Recognition. Deal. Danny had said, gripping his Les Paul tighter. Jimi had simply nodded and gone back to tuning. Slowly. Methodically. Like there was no hurry. Like time existed differently for him than it did for everyone else in the room. That tuning had taken 90 seconds. It had felt like 90 years. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. When Jimi finally looked up, his guitar was in tune. Perfect tune. The kind of tune that isn't just technical but somehow spiritual, like the instrument and the player had agreed on something fundamental about how reality should work. "You ready?" Jimi asked. Danny nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. "This is just something I've been working on," Jimi said. "Nothing special. Just something." He placed his fingers on the fretboard. The room held its breath. And then Jimi played. It wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of playing that screamed, "Look at me, look at what I can do." It was something else entirely. It was 12 notes. Maybe 13. Played over the course of 23 seconds. But those notes, they didn't just travel from the guitar to the air. They traveled through time, through space, through every person in that room's understanding of what a guitar could express. Each note held universes. The spaces between notes held entire philosophies. The vibrato, subtle, almost imperceptible, contained more emotion than most players generated in entire solos. It wasn't about technique. It was about truth. When Jimi finished, he let the final note ring out. It sustained longer than physics should have allowed, vibrating through the studio's wooden floor, through the walls, through everyone's chest cavity. Then silence. Danny sat frozen on his stool. His hands hadn't moved. His guitar suddenly felt like a foreign object. Heavy. Wrong. "Your turn," Jimi said quietly. Danny looked down at his Les Paul. At his fingers. At the calluses he'd built over 12 years of practice. At the muscle memory that had made him the best guitarist in Birmingham. He positioned his hands. Tried to remember where Jimmy's fingers had been. Tried to recall the sequence of notes. They'd been so simple. Just 12 notes. Maybe 13. He played the first note. It sounded like a note. Just a note. Technically correct. Perfectly in tune. Completely, devastatingly empty. He played the second note. Then the third. By the fifth note, everyone in the room understood what was happening. This wasn't about whether Danny could replicate the technical sequence. He could. He was good enough for that. This was about everything that existed beyond technique. Danny made it to the ninth note before he stopped. Not because he couldn't continue. Because suddenly, continuing felt obscene. Like faking an emotion he didn't feel. Like lying about understanding something he didn't understand at all. His hands dropped to his sides. The room remained silent. No one laughed. No one smirked. No one said "I told you so." Because everyone in that room, from Charlie the engineer to Mitch Mitchell to the assistant who'd been making tea in the corner, understood they'd just witnessed something that couldn't be explained. They'd witnessed the difference between playing guitar and speaking through guitar. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Jimi set his Stratocaster down gently. Not carelessly. With the kind of respect you'd give something that's part of you. He stood up and walked over to Danny. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just deliberately. Like every step had meaning. He crouched down beside Danny's stool so they were eye level. "You're a good player," Jimi said. And his voice carried no irony, no mockery. Just simple observation. "Really good. Technically, you're probably better than half the session guys in this city." Danny couldn't speak. His throat had closed. "But here's what I learned a long time ago," Jimi continued, his voice so quiet that everyone in the room had to lean in to hear. "The guitar doesn't care how fast you can play. It doesn't care about your scales or your theory. All it cares about is whether you're telling the truth." He paused. "Let that sit. You were playing notes," Jimi said. "I was saying something. That's the difference. And you can't fake it. You can't force it. You can only open yourself up to it." Jimi stood up. He walked back to his stool, picked up his Stratocaster, and held it out to Danny. "Here," he said. "Try it with this." Danny looked at the guitar like it was a sacred object. Which, in that moment, it was. "I can't," Danny whispered. "You can't," Jimi said. "But not tonight. Tonight you learned something. And that's more valuable than playing it right." He smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small curve at the corner of his mouth. Gentle. Understanding. The smile of someone who'd been where Danny was sitting. "The instrument knows when you're ready," Jimi said. "And when you're ready, it'll speak through you. But first you have to stop trying to prove you deserve it." In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. Jimi sat back down on his stool. He picked up a pen from the music stand beside him and wrote something on the back of a guitar pick. He handed it to Danny. Danny looked at it. 3 words written in Jimi's messy handwriting. "Listen before playing. That's the whole secret," Jimi said. "Everything else is just everything else." He turned to Charlie. "Let's take a break. Danny, you want some tea? We've got about an hour before the string section arrives." And just like that, the moment ended. Not with applause or revelation or dramatic conclusion. Just with Jimi offering tea to a man he just quietly dismantled and rebuilt. The session continued 90 minutes later. The strings were recorded. Danny stayed. He didn't play, just watched. Watched how Jimi listened between takes. Watched how he adjusted not just notes but spaces. Watched how he treated every person in the room like they mattered. The engineer. The assistant. The string players. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. Danny Mitchell never worked as a session musician again. Not because he couldn't. Because he didn't want to. Not until he understood what Jimi had tried to teach him. He spent the next 3 years barely playing. Just listening. To everything. To silence. To the spaces between sounds. To the truth underneath technique. When he finally picked up a guitar again in 1971, something had changed. Not his skill, that had always been there. His relationship to the instrument. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was trying to say something. He never became famous. Never had a hit record. Never played arenas. But musicians who played with him in small clubs around London in the 70s would sometimes mention him with a certain reverence. "Danny Mitchell," they'd say. "He plays like he's been somewhere. Like he understands something." The guitar pick, the one with Jimi's handwriting, stayed in Danny's pocket for 43 years. Until the day he died in 2011, at 67, quietly in his sleep. His daughter found it while going through his belongings. She didn't understand what it meant. But she kept it. Framed it. And sometimes, when she tells people about her father, she mentions that he once spent 3 minutes in a room with Jimi Hendrix, and those 3 minutes taught him what 12 years of practice couldn't. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Olympic Studios doesn't exist anymore. Torn down, rebuilt, turned into something else. But there's a plaque now where the building used to stand. It mentions Hendrix, of course. The albums he recorded there. The history. It doesn't mention Danny Mitchell. Or that February night in 1968. Or the 12 notes that taught a cocky guitarist the difference between playing music and speaking truth. But the people who were in that room remember. And sometimes, late at night, in small studios around the world, when a young guitarist gets too confident, too cocky, too focused on speed over substance, someone will tell them the story. "Listen before playing," they'll say. Hendrix said that once. And if the young guitarist is ready, really ready, they'll understand what it means. The guitar doesn't care how fast you can play. It only cares if you're telling the truth.